Now in prison, they've got this scam going where they charge a ton of money for phone calls that you make out of prison. Well, you've got a customer base that is literally locked up, right? They don't have any other recourse. It's not like they'll be like, you know what, I'm not interested in using these two different groups. Securus and Veritas Capital have an overwhelming majority of the market, the prison phone market. It's not like they're like, okay, you know what, I'm going to use AT&T instead. So they don't have any choice, so it's easy to ironically rob them while they're in prison. Now, to give you a sense of how bad it can be, there's been cases that have been brought to the FCC that, for example, where a 15-minute call costs $17. Now, given how little prisoners make inside prisons when they get jobs, and I'll get to that in a second, working to get $17 can take you days on end. And in a 15-minute call, it's already wiped away. Those are rates that they have in prison are far higher than the rates we have in the outside world. Again, they're locked up. They don't have a choice, right? So now these complaints were brought to the FCC, and the FCC, it looks like, is going to rule in favor of people trying to do reform here. And they're going to say, hey, look, your maximum that you can charge is 25 cents a minute, which, by the way, is still a significantly larger rate than it is for the outside world, but bounds of reason, okay? Now, of course, the two companies that are involved here are crying uncle, and they say, I can't, or crying bloody murder, I should say. Oh my God, I can't believe they're going to do this. They're against capitalism. We can barely make a profit as it is. Now, they don't even say that because their profit is overwhelming, and so is their revenue. For example, Veritas Capital was part of Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs sold it recently after holding it for a couple of years, and when they sold it in 2011, their gain was only 325%. So I believe they made a healthy profit off of that. Now, a different private equity company owns that. Goldman Sachs is more investment banking. Securus was also sold. That's the other major player here. They apparently have plenty of revenue because they were sold for $640 million. Now, Peter Wagner, who's with the Prison Policy Initiative, points out the main problem here. He says, I can't think of a business that I use regularly that charges me a fee to take my money. Now, let me pause here to explain that part of it. Because not only do they charge unbelievable rates for the phone calls, but they then say, if your family members are going to put money into your account, every time they put money in, I'm going to charge them either $8 or $10. No, but wait a minute, I'm putting money into the account, which you're going to take. That's right, now give me $10 extra. So to go back to Peter's quote, he says, I can't think of a business that I use regularly that charges me a fee for taking my money. Generally, companies absorb those costs because they want my business. Because this industry has its customers locked in, pun intended, they don't have to worry as much about competition. Well, of course, they don't have to worry about competition at all. So now, I want to give you an example from a different story we did to give you a sense of how bad these phones inside the prisons are. Now, you remember we did the story of Stephanie George. This is a horrible injustice. She's got a life sentence because of 3 strikes. 2 of the strikes were for selling drugs for a grand total of $160. The 3rd strike, it appears that she was set up by her boyfriend for he stored some cocaine in her apartment and then blamed her for it when he got caught, okay? And since she didn't have anybody to turn in, she was the one left holding the hot potato, okay? Now, but that's not the part of the story I'm interested in. As a throwaway, in the middle of the New York Times article about it, they talked about how much it costs to make these phone calls, unrelated to this action at the FCC. Now, when she works in the prison, she gets paid 92 cents an hour. That's it, 92 cents, okay? Now, how much do they charge her for prison calls? 23 cents a minute. So apparently, they're among the more reasonable phone centers in that prison, right? Because the max is going to be 25 cents if the FCC gets its way. So for 1 hour of work, she just gets to make a 4-minute phone call. I mean, it's one thing to imprison them, but then you make them work for almost no money at all, 92 cents an hour. And then on top of that, if they want to call their family, she's got 3 kids at home. You charge them 23 cents a minute. I mean, what a scam. And by the way, part of the reason this scam is successful is because they cut the prisons in on some of the profits. They give them a small commission, and they get hooked on that money, and then they're like, now you don't want to take that commission away, do you? In fact, you want to increase that commission, right? Let me charge them even more and more money. So yes, the FCC should definitely step in and regulate here. Obviously, these two companies will spend a tremendous amount of money, the private equity firms that hold them, to make sure that there is no reform here. Let's hope the FCC doesn't listen to them. As I say it, I think, oh boy. But so far, they're headed in the right direction. This desperately needs reform.